Hi, my name is Reed the Oracle, and this is my new series, Behind the Sacred, where I explore my relationship with the sacred in the hope that it provides you with guidance and a blueprint in your own journey as you go down this path, right? The sacred journey is a really personal experience, and I think a lot of people have teachers and guides, which are all really helpful, but I think by nature of what it is, it's actually a really personal experience. And because of that, a lot of people, I don't think, really show the workings out of what they're doing, right? They don't show what it's like to actually be in relationship with the divine, with spirit, with your ancestors, with your guides. So my actual desire with this series is to give you a bit of an insight on what that looks like as a mystic, high priestess, oracle, and spiritual leader, right? This series initially was meant to be very short form content for Instagram, and what ended up happening is it just wasn't working. And this is the beauty about the co-creation and creation in general, is that when you take something and put it outside of yourself, all of a sudden it tells you what it wants to be. And Behind the Sacred wanted to be something with more depth, more intimacy, and a little bit more personal than what I had initially planned for it, which was more of a teaching, which makes me feel more comfortable because there's less vulnerability. But at the end of the day, the relationship with the divine is an intimate and very personal experience, and therefore if I was just to teach you, I wouldn't be doing anything different to what the gurus are doing already, right? So I'm coming here kind of with the intention of being naked. Forgive me if I do try and hide, because it is a really hard thing to do, but I want to be the person that Behind the Sacred needs me to be its creator. So between us, we're going to show up to you and show up for you so that you can kind of take something away that hopefully has value. But you know what? Like anything, take what resonates, leave the rest. I always advise people before they listen to something to just kind of set the intention to do that. It's really helpful, and it starts to prepare you for the idea of energy work and the way things can sometimes land in us and kind of hold on. Yeah, there is something really beautiful about starting this journey as a mystic myself, and someone who has had my own journey, which I'm going to be sharing with you in this episode. It's really difficult to be seen as a high priestess. The sort of definition, or the sort of archetype of a high priestess, is very hidden, right? So this coming forward and like this is kind of introducing an era for myself in which the witch's wound is not flaring up and telling me that I am going to get killed. Basically. And if anyone you know who does this kind of work, they are always battling with that, especially if they are honestly engaging with the ancestral work or the ancestral lines that have been in this role, because there is a lot of history around being a witch that has not worked out in our favor, especially as women or feminine presenting people, or even queer people, to be fair. Like anyone who has taken on this role and has challenged the overculture, the patriarchy, it's always going to cause friction, because there is great power in what we do as mystics, right? So this series is introducing what a mystic is using my story. There are so many ways to interact with the divine that it's important that I make it very clear that this is my journey, right? This is my process. And it will have some archetypal truths to it. So there will be threads in it which will be present in a lot of people's journeys, and there'll be some that will be deeply personal to my lineage, my ancestry, and my guides, right? So if anything resonates, I really love that. And yeah, let's go ahead. So like, a mystic is someone who has an intimate partnership with the divine, right? This is someone who looks for God in everything they do. That there are mystics in all fields. Like, mystics are to be a mystic is not who you are, right? Or it's how you do it. Like, it's basically, you could be a scientist, like Einstein, for example. You could be a poet, Rumi. You could be a writer, James Baldwin, right? Like, these are people that hold, in my opinion, but also for certain people like Rumi, like known for mysticism, you can have all types of outlets for the divine, but what makes you a mystic is how you interact with the divine and God in your day-to-day life. So similar to what I said in the beginning, in which when I created, I realized that the thing that I was creating also had an opinion. It had an input into this. There was something that it had to give this process, right? That is what it is to be a mystic. That is the sort of foundation. It's this idea that we are constantly in communion with something bigger than us, no matter how small, or however small it comes with it. That could be a small animal or something as huge as the planets, right? There is something sacred about the connection and the meaning that we make of that. And I like to say it's kind of like flirting with God in your day-to-day, like looking for glimpses of the divine in interactions, in experiences. It is a particular, I know that anyone who is listening to this will understand if they have felt it before. And although I believe that everyone can hold the archetype of the mystic, in the sense that everyone can channel the archetype of the mystic, not everyone is here to embody that in themselves, right? And I am someone who feels that I've come here with that as the embodiment of the mystic. So I come here to fall in love with life continuously, so that I can then allow people to have those tools, right? I believe that I have a role to allow the gods to channel through me so that they can walk on this earth. I think Teresa of Avila has this beautiful quote around the fact that the gods have no hands on this earth but us, right? So I take that very personally. I feel like that there is something so beautiful about being someone who can take that divinity and ground it into the reality, and that is the act of channeling, and anyone who creates is doing that act, but the intentionality of it is what makes a mystic, right? So mystics, for me, they tend to be the people that when I hear them speak, there's such a deep resonance. So there is something bigger than the words that they're saying, right? I often feel like my heart is cracking open when I hear them speak. And it's this interesting thing where to love so deeply and to know that God, to channel that God love into this world, means that you are so intimate with grief, right? I have a teacher and fellow mystic that I adore, Elisa Philosophia, on TikTok and on YouTube, and she speaks about love being so close to grief, like love being one of the highest forms of grief because it exists in the absence of something. And I think that's what the mystic is always straddling, that deep divine spark and then the absence of it. And we can sometimes get stuck in this trap of feeling like there's meaninglessness. It's meaningless to be here. Like, I think sometimes that is the burden that a mystic can feel. What is the point when there's so much suffering, when people don't get it, when they can't see you, and there's all these questions that will be constantly ruminating around that, and I think that's why we have to kind of anchor down into the beauty of life. Again, James Baldwin says, I cannot be a pessimist because I am alive. And I think that is the sentiment of it. It's like, how could I, every time I want to be dragged down by the waves of grief, I'm reminded that that grief is born of such a deep, deep, deep love, right? And that is what we are wrestling with all the time. And it's an existence that is full. It's full of feeling. And I'm going to talk about my personal journey at different stages where I was initiated, because there is often initiations that happen, and there's more than one, and you are never complete. The universe is infinite, so therefore your knowledge is, and that means that every day is a school day. And that humility is what grounds us, because especially as me, I am a descendant of holy people, like in all lines. I'm of mixed heritage, and in all lines there are holy people in my ancestry and in my lineage, and I've inherited so many gifts. And one of the gifts that I've inherited because of that is the gift of gnosis, which is the knowing through lived experience, not just mine but others, right? Especially those holy people that have lived before me. And because of that, that despondency that comes with knowing so much can be very, 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 very depressing, is all I can say. Like, the gift of gnosis can come with a bit of a... I remember when someone said to me, "You're a know-it-all," and I was like, yes, I am. That is what gnosis is. But then you're reminded that you only know something from the point in which you enter it. And this is what I would say for any person that is channeling or has been given information outside of themselves about a certain situation, is you only know it. It is a knowing, but it is only of the knowledge of that instant that you've entered that situation. And there are so many broader things happening, which means that there are multiple truths, right? There are multiple truths. And you might sit there and look at a certain situation with someone and be like, oh, they shouldn't do that because I know X, Y, Z, and you're not wrong. But what you don't know is what their ancestors are trying to put them through, because there's something they have to learn, or some karma that they have to shift, or whatever beliefs that are moving. And it's almost like dangling a carrot. You're seeing the person being taken through a story that you have only entered at chapter 6, right? But if you were there for 7, 8, 9, you would see something different. You would see plot twists, etc. And there is a bigger force of knowing around that you cannot enter from where you are. And that's where the humility comes in knowing, because you realize, actually, I only know from my point of reference, and I also can learn new things every day. I can shift that reference point every day. I can see things from different lenses. And as a mystic, that's what we embody. And in Zen Buddhism, they call this the beginner's mind, right? The beginner's mind, which allows you to see things from a state of newness. And it's a gorgeous experience. And it's why I try and put myself into new situations quite often, because when you are a know-it-all, you will get depressed thinking the world is, all the timelines are just going to go forward how they always have done, when there is such gorgeousness. So from that, my favorite mystics, I have favorite mystics, and to be fair, I think you will be drawn to mystics who tend to embody your story, right? Your ancestors are not just the people that are connected to you. I believe your ancestors are people that have walked your story, and that is a really, really deep root belief. So therefore, sometimes I find people that embody my path, and they have been such great teachers, and a lot of them I've passed, but they left with them grains of wisdom that have supported me so deeply. And I've met them at different stages of my life as I've been initiated, and when I talk about my story, I will share that. The first is the Buddha, and there's so many reasons for this, but I think there is just such grace in the actions and the behavior that I adore. I think there was a story that I once heard, which the Buddha once he had gained enlightenment, he was sitting under the tree when he gained enlightenment, and after he prayed and thanked the tree for a week. And I think that those actions, they absolutely just light me up. Like that is when my heart cracks open, and I'm just in awe of that level of grace and humility to pray to a tree for the shelter and the assistance that he had given him. It says to me everything I need to know about his teachings. And I was Buddhist for on and off 10 years, so that those teachings have been so intrinsic to my journey, and as we go through all of this, I'm sure that they will show up, even though I do not identify as a Buddhist now. Jesus, another one of my mystics that I honestly adore for many reasons. I'm not Christian. But I believe that the technologies that Jesus had brought into this earth at the time in which he was here, that have been kept in the Bible amongst other gospels, are ones that are really aligned with my values. The technology of forgiveness, just the grace that he moved in the world, like the way that he told stories, the way that he used the subconscious, there's the energy work that he does, the healing that he does. I just think there is so much in what Jesus has given us, and it honestly wounds me when I think of what the barriers that Christianity creates to us to have access to that relationship. But I am also going to talk in depth about that in another episode, because I'm very passionate about that and Jesus's teachings. The other mystic that I am obsessed with is St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis of Assisi is, I believe, a medieval saint. Again, obsessed with him, and I don't know who he is, but his teachings at the courage that he showed throughout his life. I'm going to do another whole episode on this guy, because mine and his stories are amazingly linked, and I'm looking forward to sharing that. But another person that showed great grace, and a story that he talks of, is one where he speaks of walking on the pebbles gently because of the life that he saw in them. And I just, again, it's something else that cracks me open and completely, gorgeous. Nature, again, outside mystics, all of the poets and all the writers that are aligned with nature, that is my lineage. I adore it. I've also worked very closely with both animals and the land, so that is woven throughout my story a lot, right? So all of these things about the mystics, I gave a few people that are more contemporary. Like, I do believe like people like James Baldwin have a mystic soul. I believe like Audre Lorde, like then Bell Hooks. Like, there's certain people in which the way they perceive the world is what makes me know that they're an intimate relationship with the divine, and they channel that. Like, poetry is not a luxury. When I think of the uses of the erotic, like things like that, when you read that, you're just like, you have a perspective. And I think that, again, when I hear people who are channeling the archetype of the mystic, I am instantly intrigued by that depth of wisdom. I think that depth of knowing that goes beyond their lived experience, and it comes from an interconnectedness with everything, which again is known as God, right? So I hope, I just love this stuff, and I hope that throughout all these things I demonstrate to you, all these series, all these episodes, I demonstrate to you how that intimate partnership comes into place, right? Because that is what, when I talk about how a lot of the time these things are kept behind, they're kept very private behind the veil, the narrow path. Like, it's a very lonely path. So you work these things out in the shadows, and yet I know that part of my purpose is to bring this stuff to the light, because I feel like it's not as scary as it seems, but it is very, very deep work. So it requires a type of courage and a type of strength that we in the culture that we live in now don't respect in the way that I think we should, and therefore by me demonstrating that courage, it allows you to have an insight into that. So yes, so I'm going to talk about my initiations, because I've had 4 main ones I can think of. Alongside those, there was loads of mini things that would happen, but these initiations are areas in my life when I really, really knew or got snippets into my power, the power of my belief, the power of spirit and divinity, and started to create a relationship. I have no idea who did that, but thank you. Anyway, yeah, so I grew up and I was always obsessed with God. Like, I was a child that was like, guys, let's go to church. Loved it so much. Crack, right? Sorry, don't know where that came from, but yeah, I always, when I look back, had this desire for esoteric wisdom or spiritual faith stories. I grew up going to a Christian school, and that meant there was a lot of decolonialism that had to happen along my story, which I again will talk about at later episodes. But when I moved to the UK to be with my dad, he was Muslim at the time, but yet was the type of man that would have tons of books, like whether it was a Dalai Lama, whether it was very Eastern philosophy. So Eastern philosophy was introduced very quickly, and he was very open with his faith and his belief systems, right? So I had always been surrounded by it, so I was primed from a very young age and into adolescence to be open to it. But when I was 21, I was in university, and I got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune illness. And this was really interesting because, again, the mystics that I spoke of, or I think for St. Francis, but also others like Teresa of Avila, St. John of the Cross, like a lot of the mystics tend to have some form of sickness, because that is one of the path of initiation that I went through. And I was diagnosed with RA, and all the plans that I had for myself all of a sudden didn't fit in. I was trained to be a corporate lawyer. I really had this idea that I was going to fall into this capitalist kind of fairy tale and be successful and just make loads of money and just do the things. I was drinking on the Kool-Aid. That's all I can say. I was drinking on the Kool-Aid, right? And then I got sick, and disability is a process of such deep humility, because in other ways, but that's not what I wanted to say now, it is an automatic rejection of the system, because the system will reject you first. The system is not made for disabled people, so automatically you are put in a position where you're like, oh, all the plans I had, I no longer belong, because I can no longer work under the rules of the current capitalist system, and that was devastating. So at the time, that felt like everything that I'd ever worked for had been robbed from me, and I was tired, chronic fatigue. I was in pain. I couldn't work the way I want to work. I was no longer able to be the master of my body. My body became to dictate to me what it needed, which again, as I moved forward, became such a beautiful and intimate relationship. But at that time, because we grew up in a system where we are the authority, as in what we want is the authority, the body's wisdom was very much ignored. At this time, I was completely, like, my whole reality had come crumbling down. If you're into tarot, the definition of a tarot card, and it was absolutely life-changing. There was a saying that when a student appears, the teacher arrives, and I remember walking into this vintage shop, and I met this woman, and she ended up being a Buddhist, SGI Buddhist, and from that moment I started chanting, right? So I would chant like 1 hour a day. At this point, not serious, just kind of like getting to know the faith. I wasn't part of the SGI itself, but I was just using the technology to kind of explore spirituality. So I went into remission within 6 months, and that was unheard of. And I think when you are initiated into spirit, I think what happens is you are given an example of your power very quickly. Like your first, and I don't know if this is a rule, but I'm going to put it there because some people might relate, but you're put into a situation where you can see the power of your belief and what it can do when you are following a new belief system or a new way of being, right? And I went into remission, my health improved, all through having a new way of living. And it happened very quickly. And I that always stuck with me. That was a seed that is planted. So when I returned back, because again, you might have your belief, you might kind of put on the belief, but underneath is all the nervous system, the trauma, just still, you have to also do the work, right? You have to also do that layers of work. And when you don't do that the veneer that you put on top crumbles. And I was given the insight of what was possible, but without doing the deeper work, it crumbled very quickly, right? The next phase of that was the next phase of that was when I was 26. So at 26, I had moved to another city. I was dating this person. We'd moved in together. So I'm sitting there doing my little capitalism, patriarchy. I had just joined the overculture, and I started. My health again got really bad. So that there is a connection there between my health and also like my spiritual well-being. And I remember me and my partner were going through issues, and then I decided to go away. And then when I remember staying with family and having actual psychic visions. Like I knew things, and it's the first time it was that visceral. So I basically was told that my partner was having an affair with someone. And what was so interesting about this time is I'd also revisited Buddhism, and I had actually officially joined the faith and had received my Gohonzon, which is something that you're given as a Buddhist, like it's your altar. And I'd been chanting, I think, 8 hours a day. So 8 hours a day. So I was very, very, again, in tune with something above my consciousness. I was shifting my consciousness at such a huge state. And I think I was asking for change. And as a result, I was getting these huge psychic downloads. And it's to the extent where I would know to the minute what was going on. So I decided to go home one day early and not tell anyone, because out of guidance from whoever was speaking to me at this time. And when I entered my house, I found that my partner and this person were in the home. Blah, blah, very traumatic, right? So yeah, that was shocking. Again, another tower moment. Completely life absolutely shattered, right? And again, at this point, something shifted inside of me, because I had such visceral proof. And again, so this is what I think happens. You get proof of your faith and you get proof of your power, right? And all of these things are not the actual root of your strength, but they give you like a taste of the fruits of the spiritual relationship as a form of intrigue, or to kind of like coax you in more. After that, I started to actually do some work. So I then became a Reiki practitioner, started to do energy work. This was at the age of 26, right? So I was 21 when I first had the first experience, 26 at the second experience. And then when I hit 30, my Saturn return, that was my third experience. So at this time, I have now actively been practicing actively had a spiritual practice, right? So I had met a community. I'd been exploring tarot. I still was very much, in my opinion, a novice, but I started to also connect with nature a little bit more, and I joined a group. I've joined a couple of spiritual groups and started to kind of learn different teachings outside of the conventional religions and faith systems. What was so interesting about this period is then lockdown happened. So there was and I have a chronic illness. So there was a lot of insular work. So I went in, and one of the things that I think really, really happens, and what my guides did at the time, again, the relationship wasn't as clear, but looking back, I can see that my guides helped me at that time focus on my mental health, right? So I was also joining like therapeutic groups. I was learning things about trauma. I was reading a lot of things about the nervous system. So there was being very much guided to work on the mind and the bodies. I started to try do more gentle exercise to try and get, at this time my health was really bad. Like I was getting to a point where I wasn't able to walk. And yeah, there was this theme in the first 30 years of my life. There's very much a theme of feeling stuck and imprisoned. And I think the actual experience of being locked in, which was lockdown, was actually, for my Saturn return, the form of liberate me from that. And one of the biggest things that happened at that time is I received my British passport out of 30 years of being denied, despite being born here. Again, another story that I'm sure I will share at some point. But so there was so much like doors opening all of a sudden, and it felt like at this point there was a timing thing. This was like a divine timing. It was like everything had to meet this point. And I think this is the scariest thing that can happen sometimes with spirituality, is that we always have this tussle and this tension between predestination and what we have what we can actually impact. And at this point it felt like a release had happened and everything was just opening up. I was all of a sudden able to travel. The things that had been trapping my mind were slowly releasing through this work I was doing. My body, I didn't have to work because I was vulnerable and locked down. So I also had freedom that I've never had before in this disabled body. So I then was able to listen to it. And so this was such a huge Saturn return for me and for most people in many ways. But I think I made meaning of it. So I can say that the Saturn return was like the door opening out of the cage. It was just like here. And then I was horse in the stables that was like, I'm not ready to move. And then the following 3 years were that I'm preparing to move sort of thing. So that was such a huge part of my life, to then be followed by, in 2023, to the last initiation I had. And I think I'm currently going through one right now, which this is the result of. But the last one I had was after another breakup with someone. I'd had a soulmate connection and it was impossible. And again, I will talk about this in depth in a future session. But I had got my heart broken, and a lot of beliefs that I had came crashing down, and they were the last real beliefs that were rooted in the capitalistic belief of love, romantic love, and prosperity gospel, and if you work hard you'll do anything, and all of those really, really insidious beliefs that are planted in us, that even as we're untangling and working with divinity, they get in the way of us having that deeper connection to something, because they're based on merit and as opposed to our being, right? Which is a huge important lesson to learn, and a very hard one to deconstruct inside yourself. But I remember at this time I'd just come back from a really, really huge trip that I felt was pivotal to this part, where I'd went from being someone who didn't believe in my spiritual authority to someone who was thrust into it very quickly. And I started working with a goddess called Hecate, who had said to me, okay, it's time to go into the underworld. It doesn't have to be a scary place. That was in 2023. And then since then, my growth has been astronomical, as in from going to being someone who perceived themselves as a novice spiritually to going into someone who can sit in front of you and call myself a mystic and a spiritual leader and someone of great power in and knowledge and wisdom. That was the last 3 years. That was what came out of that, and it came from deep inner work, it came from nervous system work, and it came from a lot of support. So it came from, again, sitting in this energy of co-creation, of allowing other people to inform me and be informed by that. And this was life-changing. And I often think that a lot of people come into this work thinking that it's something that grants you great power, and that is true. However, it also is something that forces you into great humility, because to be a mystic is to release so much control of what you think life is, and be in relationship with what is actually waiting to come through you. And this, you have to release your beliefs in hierarchy, you have to release your belief in power, knowledge, or everything has to be shifted outside of the capitalist and white supremacist structures. And the more that we do that, the more that we are gifted with our power. And I think one of the ways that I've been reframing this in myself is thinking about hierarchy not being who has the most power, but being who has the most responsibility, right? And that coming with no perks. There's not a perk to having more responsibility. It's just that you have, because you have the power, you are more responsible. And in that sense, as a mystic, my responsibility is to be true to God, is to be true to my authentic nature, be true to my ancestors, and be true to myself. And therefore, there is great devotion to that as a practice. That is my main priority. And this is what makes me different to maybe a warrior, or different to someone who is more in a politician path. There is something very important about me showing up as a channel, as a clear channel, and as someone who is true to this whatever needs to be represented in this earth that's voices unheard, as it is all a reflection of divinity, and that includes parts of yourself. So when I have client sessions, or if someone comes to me, that is my goal, to give voice to the parts that have been disempowered in a system of supremacy. So yeah, I hope that's helpful. Like, I hope that this is going to give you an insight, because all this is an overview, right? So I want you to engage with this, knowing that this is an overview, and as we step into different kind of like what I plan to do is enter topics from a certain place, and then show you the whole through those topics, right? Show you, because everything, it's so profound that it's so profound that it can only be entered into from simplicity. And that's where the clarity comes in. So yeah, I hope you tune in for the next series. I am hoping to be posting these every Monday. You can follow me on Instagram at Read the Oracle, subscribe to the channel Read the Oracle on YouTube, and also Substack Read the Oracle, where I'll be sharing what I call the living liturgy, which is long form writing on some of my beliefs and experiences. So thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to sharing this with you next week.